Right. So at any rate, the Tredyffrin police were not perceived in the 60s. They were not our enemies. They were our friends. And so much so that if I was at my grandmom's house in Paoli, if we were up there for a party or something, we would call, we wouldn't have a way home, we'd call and say, okay, who's on duty tonight? Can you come get us and take us back to Mount Pleasant? And they, oh, they're not doing anything. Yeah, okay. The music fair's, it's not letting out till 11. We'll come get you. And they would take us home. But in this instance, when it was known that the warlocks were planning on this attack on the blacks on the main line, in the black community, so what Tredyffrin Township did, and this one you won't see it on any record, and they'll deny it until the cats come on. Probably everybody's died who was involved, but by now. But at any rate, they came and they gave guns to everybody up here on them who were.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And the same thing in Paoli. So that when the warlocks came through, they came through and saw nothing but guns aimed at them. So they had to keep riding. You know, because the guns were. You know.
They weren't expecting that, huh?
They were not expecting it.
So they got the shock of their lives.
They got the shock of their lives.
Good, put them in their place.
The police department did that unofficially?
Unofficially.
Wow, that is.
You know,
that's something that would never happen today.
No,
that's
no,
cool.
because they weren't today. They're not the they're not perceived as being the friends that they were when we were growing up. I mean, the policemen knew our parents, knew every kid. You know, today they don't know unless your kid gets in trouble. They don't know.
It's the loss of the
community. Yeah, it's the loss of the sense of community, because the community was not only just here in Mount Pleasant, but it extended to anybody who was involved. Another incident was the white kids from Bridgeport decided that they wanted to show how bad they were, and they were going to come here in Mount Pleasant and they were going to tear up and beat up people. Well, what happened was the Tredyffrin police, they didn't know that Mount Pleasant Avenue was a dead end, and they made the mistake of turning down Mount Pleasant Avenue. Well, the police blocked off the top of Mount Pleasant Avenue and let the fight let it go on. So these guys got beat up, of course.
Consequences.
Consequences.
You gotta think ahead.
Think ahead, you know. But that's the kind of thing, you know. Like, okay, let these teenagers, you know, duke it out and be done with it. And it happened.
Yeah, they learn the hard way.
They learned the hard way. Similarly, back in the day, in the 60s, we would have what we would call, at that point in time, we would say, okay, we're going to block off, which they would, block off going down Radnor Road, and, you know, it goes around to Croton Road?
Yes.
Okay. You would have to go down Radnor Road, and you were not allowed to go less than 70 miles an hour. You know? And we would call them, these are the suicide rides that we would take.
Suicide rides.
You know? And the police would block it off, so nobody would be coming up to make sure that you could make the turn onto Croton Road and come back up Fletcher. But it was that kind of craziness that cemented the relationship and bonded not only the police, the authorities, but also the neighborhood too, so that everybody, you know, you wouldn't allow anybody to harm one of the policemen, nor would the policeman allow anyone to harm you. You know, so it was a very, very symbiotic relationship. In its craziness it was. You know, today that would never happen, because everybody has moved into their little, what I call their little silos. And because everybody's siloed now, there's not that willingness to come out of the silo and to branch out and say, okay, you know, we're all human beings. You know, and we can have fun, or we can, you know, really, really be crazy, you know, but we didn't allow it to get like that. You know, you allowed the steam to blow off, and so that people, you know, but there weren't any guns or knives or anything. That, you know, that was just something that didn't occur back then. You didn't do it, except for that one time when the police were really worried that the warlocks were gonna, because they had gotten, and Sheriffin had gotten the word coming down from Reading, from the state police had warned, you know, them about it, so they were ready when they came through. But those kinds of things happened, and it was just, it was, you look back and you say, as bad as it was great as a community. You know, that everyone was together.
Just going back to the gang thing real quickly.
Yeah.
You mentioned gangs from like Norristown, the Warlocks, and the group of white.
Yeah, the Norristown gang was called the Gay Blades. You know?
Interesting
You
name
know?
choice.
Yeah, I know. Not the Gay Blades, excuse me, the Gay Lords. The Gay Lords of Norristown.
Okay, still an interesting choice.
Yeah, Gay Lords. You
Still
know?
an interesting thing.
And I mean, you know, these gangs existed, and everybody knew. You know, there were gangs from Westchester, gangs from Chester, gangs from Norristown, which were the larger communities. Well, these were here, Wayne, Ardmore, Bryn Mawr, Paoli, Malvern, were small communities. And so, you know, it was because of the bar here, this bar was pretty central.
Is that what attracted them?
That's what, yeah.
So they would come in like.
They'd be
drink,
coming
and
into the, yeah.
They get drunk.
They
and
get drunk
start-
and then, right, and they would
fights.
overflow into the community, the
Okay.
issues. And so, you know, the community had to handle it with, you know, we're not going to stand for this. You know, you can get outrageous if you want, but, and we have the police to back us. You know, to keep it from getting out of hand in the community. So, yeah.
Now, you said the police force was very helpful and open. What about like the other governing bodies in Tradition?
They were non-existent for, I mean, they were there, but they were non-entities when it came to the community relations. They were not involved. This was strictly between the police department and the communities that they served. Back then it was just, you know, you had the township. They just stayed in their little board and did whatever they did for rules. The one thing, though, that they did do, which, you know, you look back and you understand why they did it, but it kind of took away the rural aspect of Mount Pleasant. We all had farm animals, and then they passed an ordinance where we couldn't have our farm animals anymore. We grew up with chickens and pigs and hogs and ducks and, you know, everything that you could raise, so you didn't have to depend on going to the grocery store. Of course, I still can't eat a whole chicken. I don't buy a whole chicken. I buy it cut up, because as a child watching it, my dad wring its neck and then get it ready for the table.
No, I couldn't do that.
I buy my chicken cut up. I don't. Still have visions of that. You know?
I don't blame you.
And if I had to kill the animal myself, I'd be a vegetarian.
Yeah.
You know.
I don't understand why.
You know, but that changed the community a lot when we no longer could have the farm animals. When they were taken away, that was taken away. And then the next thing was having, you probably can't even imagine, we had outhouses. And then the sewers came, which was a good thing. It was a good thing that, you know, we got sewers, and, you know, and the houses, of course, everybody's house had to change. We now had a bathroom with running water, and, you know, so I mean, to see the community from where it was when I was 8, 9, 10 years old, and see how it has changed. It's been a good change. Very progressive change, and yet you see people who would say, well, I don't remember there was outhouses. Yeah, we all had outhouses. You know?
It's kind of a denial.
Well, it's because they didn't experience it.
Oh.
You know, those who are younger than, say, 55, they didn't experience that, because by the time they came along, no longer did we have coal furnaces to heat the house. We were now having gas. And but I remember the days of, well, that's all we had was the coal furnace, you know, and stoking the fire. I don't even want to remember those days. Today is so much better. I can't believe how far we have come from living like that, and yet at the same time it was a simple life, and we probably were a lot happier.
Yeah.
You
That's what
know?
I always
Well,
wonder.
Well, we didn't know we were poor. That was the other thing. We were poor by today's standards, but we didn't know that. You know, here in Mount Pleasant, we were kind of isolated, kind of kept away from all of that, knowing that you were poor. We did go to school with, of course, with wealthy white people, but that didn't equate to us as that we were poor. It was just that they had more. Yeah, and I didn't grow up resenting them for that. That was another thing too that I found very different when I went to Penn State. Here I am, 18-year-old going to Penn State, and for the first time, really being confronted with overt racism. It was not really something that I grew up with, because the majority of the white people that we associated with, coming throughout from kindergarten all the way through, we weren't a threat to them. So therefore we could be equals. If that makes sense to you. You weren't a threat. So, but it was the new rich, to whom we were a threat, because we were going to be competing with them for jobs. And we were not competing with the old money. They already had their money, so we weren't competing with them. And it was this nouveau riche that felt threatened. And I think that's what's happening now with the whole, with the Mexicans coming in and the attitudes.
Where's the compassion?
There's no compassion, because people feel, they're taking my job. Well, not really. They're doing jobs you don't want to do. So, I need the guy who does my yard.
Yeah.
Go read Fountainhead and tell me who I need. Now you look at me like, what's Fountainhead? Okay, all right, we won't talk about that, but just check out Ayn Rand for
But so when you were growing up in here, you never encountered like racism or any prejudice among schoolmates?
Not from schoolmates. The only place I encountered it was the administration.
All right.
It was not from my peers. And the administration, they played at Conestoga, they played really some very mean games. Talented young black men who were very great at football. I know one in particular. The football coach withheld the offers of scholarships from him until after he signed up for the military. And he said, "Oh, by the way, here you are. You have this."
So
that was purposeful. But he couldn't. I mean, he signed up. He was committed now to the military.
They taunted him.
Yeah.
That's disgusting.
But that's the kind of games. That was what was done in order to make sure that you didn't succeed. There was a push to make sure blacks not succeed. Yeah. And there were those of us who said, you know what, I'm going on anyway, because guess what? I'm sitting here in this classroom and I'm learning the same thing as the white kids next to me. So you can't tell me that I can't do the same thing that they can do, because I can do that and I can do it better. And that's the way, you had to think. And I had to learn that. And I didn't get that from my parents so much as I got it from Miss Maisie Hall, Mrs. Avis Reed, and Mr. Alex Baghorn, who was a white man who lived here on Fairview. People like that who encouraged me to go on. It's like when I went to college, my dad would not fill out any of the financial papers for me, for college, because he was going through bankruptcy and a whole other things, but he wouldn't fill them out. So Mr. Baghorn, who worked at the courthouse, and Mrs. Reed, who worked at the courthouse, they filled out the paperwork and signed my dad's name, and so that I could get scholarships. They did that. My dad never knew anything about it until I told him when he was dying what Mr. Baghorn and Mrs. Reed had done. But it was that kind of community, where they saw that, okay, we have this kid here who really is smart. We want to see her succeed. So they would go any length to make sure that that happened. And today you don't have those significant others. They're not there. They're not there. And when you have a institutionalized segregation, and even though it was not on the books anymore, as I said, people were exercising their racism back then, and because they were in the position to do so, and in the absence of anybody who would fight back, like I was always just a rebel, and I would fight back, and I said, no, you're not going to do this to me. I graduated. I had all of my academics by the time I was finished 10th grade. I had everything I needed to go to college. So I said for my junior and senior year I was going to take business, so that in case I didn't make it in college, I'd be able to at least be a secretary. And they said, well, you can't do that. You either one or the other. You can't split and be that. I said, I can do what I want.
Yeah.
It doesn't fit with your, with the way that you are tracking, but this is my plan for me. And they were like, it's never been done. It can't be done. And I said, well, we're going to do this, and that's what I did.
Good.
I still write shorthand. I still take notes in shorthand all these years later. So it's been beneficial to have learned typing and bookkeeping and shorthand, because that helped me with my study skills and all of it. It was like, okay, I need to use this not only for business purposes, because I did start out as a secretary. I started as a secretary, and I said, okay, I'm not stupid, so I just moved up. And see an opportunity and make the most of that opportunity, and not sit back and wait for somebody to give me. And I think that's what's happened, that you have a culture out there that is sitting there waiting for somebody to give, instead of going out and developing themselves and seeing an opportunity and making the most of that opportunity. You don't get that from the parents here in Mount Pleasant currently. They're just doing whatever it is that they're doing, but they're not focusing their children as they should on developing themselves, and in spite of whatever is going on around them. I have to say that my children have done amazingly well, and it's because I taught them from the beginning, you will not be followers, you will be leaders. And they never ever even thought they had a choice not to go to college. It was not anything that was ever in the back of their minds. No, you
Thomas,
will
I'm up
achieve.
to 18. Is that?
There's really no
Still got
cutoff. I went to 27, no
Oh,
problem.
okay.
So,
Okay.
when your arms get tired, just tell me, I'll take over.
No, I was just making sure I had enough
Anyway,
space.
I'm talking on and on. What other questions
No,
do
it's
you have?
interesting. Yeah.
Well, I'm a little curious. When you grew up in Mount Pleasant, just as a start off with, my guess is like it was nothing. It doesn't look anything like
Oh my God,
the
no.
area surrounding.
Oh,
Not
no.
farms and stuff back then.
There weren't farms. The houses that are here were there. It's just that everybody had animals in their backyard.
So people were like self-sustaining, like growing their own
Growing
plants and stuff. And
Yeah, and farming. I mean,
Yeah.
doing their own gardening, and so you didn't have to rely on the A&P, which was the only store then. And then here you had Hobson's now it's a barber shop, but Hobson's was a little grocery store, the neighborhood grocery store. And of course, they would overcharge, but they had the purpose, because only Mr. Bird, he had the taxi service here, that he would run people back and forth to Wayne, or as we kids hated it in the summertime especially, the older people on the street would catch you and say, okay, go to Wayne and here's my list and go shopping for me, and you'd have to walk. You could not say no. There is no way you could...
no, it's not an option.
No was not an option, because you would get beat by the person who was going to send you, and then your parents would beat you for saying no. So, and the worst beating I ever got was coming over here to Hobson's store to get an ice cream cone for Mrs. Ford, and she was like 80 years old. and she sent me to get this cone. Well, it was summertime and started dripping, so I ate the top. By the time I walked back to her house here, there's a second house here on Henry Avenue, and she was like, what happened to the top cone? And I said, well, it fell off. And she said, I see it on your mouth. Typical 10-year-old kid, you know? So not only did she beat me, but my mother did too. And I'm like, but it was going to melt. It was gonna what are you going to do? But yeah, so there wasn't, it wasn't, and there weren't very many cars in Mount Pleasant then. My dad and Mr. Bird were of the few that had a car, and Miss Hall's brother, Mr. Billy, they had a car. Not too many did. So much so when Hurricane Hazel hit, that night that Hurricane Hazel hit, the tree fell from the Young's property across onto our roof, to the Dean's house, onto the roof. And it was a really horrific, destructive hurricane. Well, that night, Gloria Carter, who lived next door, she went into labor. And so, my dad all the men had come up to the bar.
All this happening at once.
All this storm is going. He had to come up to get Dad. Gloria's in labor, so we had to get him to drive her to the hospital. The next door neighbor to Bryn Mawr to deliver her baby. And Jimmy, his middle name is Hazel. He hates it. But he was born Jimmy Carter. He was born the night of Hazel. So
the low battery indicators on.
All right. Well, then we're gonna.